Chapter 3 Spencer, Coffee, and Nate. I put the whole fiasco behind me as I headed back to Brooke's house. I suppose that could have gone a lot better, but I would just try another day. After all, he was immortal. I had time. When I entered Brooke's small apartment, I was greeted by a little rat barking at my feet. I groaned as I thought that I was done with dogs. "Brooke? In here." Her voice rang out from the bathroom. I walked around the small dog at my feet and navigated my way in her direction. I leaned against the doorway as I watched Brooke put her shoulder-length brunette hair into a bun. "Hey," she greeted with bobby pins in her mouth. "What's that?" I pointed down to the dog that had entered the bathroom. Brooke sighed as she pulled the remaining pins out of her mouth. "That's Mrs. Willis's Chihuahua. She asked me to watch it for the weekend." "The weekend?" I looked at the little thing I would hardly call a dog in disgust. "It's Thursday." Brooke straightened out her green vest and fixed her name tag. "I know, but she is paying me, and heaven knows I need the cash." I shook my head and decided to change the subject. "Is that the uniform for the movie theater?" "Yeah." Brooke nodded, then picked up the little dog. "This is Spencer, and believe it or not, it's a girl." "Okay," I mumbled as Brooke shoved the oversized rat into my hands. "If you could just take her out later, that would be fabulous." Brooke rushed past me to pack her purse. I looked down at Spencer, who began shaking in my hands. "Can't anyone have a normal dog?" "Okay, I will be back around 11 foot. Don't wait up for me," Brooke announced, grabbing the dog's face and planting a kiss on her muzzle. "Be good for Peyton," she told it before she smiled at me, and we walked to the door together. "I already fed her, so just take her out one more time and she should be all right." "Her leash and collar are on the counter," Brooke lectured, digging through her purse for her keys I knew went to her green Volkswagen Beetle. "Got it," I muttered as she gave me one last smile and closed the door behind her. I looked down at Spencer and set her down on the couch. I wasn't one to spoil a dog just because it was small. "I don't know about you," I began aloud, "but I'm hungry." I walked over to Brooke's fridge but was unsatisfied by the lack of good food. I sighed and grabbed her phone. I dialed the number to the local Chinese place just around the block and ordered some lo mein for me, and I ordered sweet and sour chicken for Brooke. I knew she liked it, and I knew she would eat it eventually. I sat down next to Spencer, who constantly seemed to be nervous, and waited for my food to come. It took about 20 minutes before the doorbell rang and I paid the delivery guy. I put Brooke's food into the fridge, but wrote a quick note on the box first. Then I grabbed a fork and my food and sat down on the couch. I switched on the television, but nothing good was really on. I settled on a rerun of a Friends episode and enjoyed my greasy food. Spencer stared at me with her big eyes that looked like they were going to pop out of her head. I patted her head comfortingly and gave her a spare vegetable every now and then. When I was finished, I threw away my trash and ripped open my fortune cookie. I looked at the little slip and read it aloud, "The one you love is closer than you think." I laughed as I tossed it in the trash along with the wrapper and popped part of the cookie into my mouth. I gave a small crumb to the dog, then got her leash ready. I figured I could take her out now so I could just relax later. I wrestled with the dog for about 5 minutes to get her collar on her, and thankfully her leash was easier. I walked down the 4 floors with the dog and walked around the block where there was a small patch of grass. Spencer decided to smell around and I let her for a while, and I shivered involuntarily. It was the starting days of winter, and in the state of New York, it was known to snow. I breathed out a sigh and watched the dog prance around for a while. I don't know how long I stood there waiting for results from that small rat, but I got none. I was so fed up with Spencer that I just pulled her along and headed back. After taking the unsuccessful walk, I returned back to the apartment in a worse mood than when I left. "Okay," said to the dog once I had unhooked her from the leash. "You have my permission to use the bathroom in the house now." I sat back on the couch and turned the TV back on. I watched it without really listening, and it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. When I woke up, I realized that I hadn't changed into pajamas, and sometime during the night Brooke had brought me a blanket. I shrugged the blanket off of me and sat up to stretch my arms. I placed my feet on the ground and immediately heard a yelp. I looked down in alarm only to see Spencer come out from under my feet. I scowled at the dog before walking around it into the bathroom. I knew Brooke was already at work, so I borrowed her brush. I changed my clothes, and then walked over to the fridge to grab a quick breakfast. I saw a yellow sticky note with my name on it in dark letters. Peyton. Working at Starbucks today. Thanks for the Chinese. I already walked Spencer, so she should be fine until I get home. Brooke. I glanced over at the dog, thankful I didn't have to stand outside in the cold waiting for her to do nothing again. I patted Spencer, who was lounging on the armchair, then grabbed my coat to leave. I hailed a cab over to Brooke's workplace, and shockingly there was a line. I walked in the building and sat at a table, since I was in no rush. After about 15 minutes of listening to that little bell ring repetitively, the crowd disappeared and I walked over to the counter. Hey, welcome to Starbucks, how may I help you? Brooke asked automatically without looking up from the register. I'll take the mocha frap, I requested, causing Brooke to look up at me. A smile crept on her face. Sure. Can you go on break? I asked as she made my drink. Brooke glanced back at a blonde teenager who was currently popping her gum. The blonde nodded to her. As soon as Brooke was finished with my drink, I paid for it, and we took a table together. I thought you said that you don't get paid for what you do. She wondered aloud as we sat. I shrugged while taking a sip of my chocolate-flavored coffee. I don't. Then how do you constantly pay for things? Brooke asked, clearly confused. When I need money, I have a special credit card. It's linked to an account only the gods can use. Hades controls all the godly funds. He makes sure that the world's economy stays in balance, and yet we can still have enough money to do the things we need to. I clarified. No way, Brooke squealed in disbelief. You could be rich. I shook my head. No, it's Hades, god of the underworld and all. He's also god of wealth, and when he isn't sucking souls, he's tending to money business in the world and for the gods. He doesn't really like to give out huge payouts. I didn't know he was in charge of that. Where does all the money come from if you have to keep the economy balanced? I don't know the mechanics of it. I know that some of the money comes from loose change you find on the street. Not all of it gets collected by people. Hades works in mysterious ways. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care where the money comes from as long as it's there for my use. Brooke cocked her head to the side in confusion. You could buy a house or something. It doesn't exactly work that way. I can't just go on $1 million shopping spree. If I could get my hands on that amount of money and I spent it all, it would look oddly suspicious. I'm given a monthly budget and I can't draw attention to myself, I explained. Suddenly the bell for the door rang again and Brooke looked over, welcoming the person to Starbucks, but letting the other girl help the customer. I glanced over at the guy and immediately recognized him as the guy from yesterday. I yelped slightly as I tried to cover my face with my hands. Brooke studied me with a both amused and confused expression. That's him, I hissed to her, still covering my face from his view. Who? Him? She glanced over at the guy. Him. I was trying to stress my point. Brooke's face lit up with recognition. Oh. The hot angel him, she whispered as she stood, but I grabbed her wrist. No, I shouted too loudly and got the attention of the guy. I tried to cover it up, but it was too late and he seemed to recognize me. Hey. He walked over to us. He didn't seem mad, just kind of curious. You're that girl who broke into my house. I could have died. You broke into his house? Brooke raised her eyebrows at me in total shock. I winced. No, his house was unlocked and I just invited myself inside. The guy, who was standing watching us converse, raised an eyebrow. I'm gunless today. Would you like to tell me whatever you wanted to? There was a gun? Brooke cut in. You can go back to work, I muttered, pushing her away a little. But Brooke stuttered, looking hurt. I gave her a "we'll talk later" look and she walked off without a word. The guy took his drink from the counter and sat down in Brooke's old seat. I joined him at the table and wondered how he could be acting so normal. "You're just going to sit with the girl that broke into your house?" He shrugged. "We're in public. There are witnesses." I laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious, but he seemed to read my thoughts. "Plus you're hot," he said, taking a sip of his drink. Now, that I believed. It was such a guy's thought. I mumbled, really unsure of where to go from here. I wasn't used to doing things this way. "I'm Peyton," I introduced myself by sticking out my hand. "Nate," he took and shook my hand once. I nodded in approval, then drifted off into silence. "Why were you in my house harassing my dog?" he asked seriously. "That thing is a bear," I retorted. "Pyro is a Saint Bernard, not a bear," Nate corrected, sounding annoyed. I studied him a moment before venturing to ask, "Why do you have such a huge dog when you live in an apartment? It has got to be a pain to walk him." Nate shrugged as if he didn't really care. "I like him." Well, that didn't tell me much. "Okay. Back to my question," Nate said. "Oh right." I was unsure of how to phrase this without sounding crazy. I couldn't come up with any way quickly. I decided to be blunt. "I'm here to help you." Nate raised an eyebrow with mild interest. "With what?" "Your love life," I answered easily. "Did Sean put you up to this?" I shook my head, passing off his comment. "No, my job is to find people's soulmates." Nate suddenly laughed and it made me realize how weird that sounded when I said it aloud. "Come on, I know Sean told you to do this." He continued to laugh. I got really aggravated then. "No, I don't even know who Sean is." Right. Where are the hidden cameras?" Nate stood and began looking around. I stood only to push him back in his seat so he didn't look like a complete idiot. "I'm serious." Nate leaned forward a little. His clear blue eyes caught and held my hazel ones. He spoke quietly so only I could hear. "Prove it." I sat back in my seat. I couldn't come up with any real proof off the top of my head. "Exactly," Nate retorted, looking smug. Something inside me boiled. "I know your secret." Nate's stupid smirk didn't falter. "What secret?" "You're immortal." I half shouted matter-of-factly. Nate's smile immediately fell and I felt myself swell with pride. It was like I had just won a childish fight, and if I was 5 years old, then I would have stuck out my tongue to prove my superiorness. "How do you know that?" His eyes swept across the room to make sure that no one was eavesdropping. "You're my assignment. I have a whole folder of information about you so I can find you your soulmate," I explained and hoped to sound convincing. Nate leaned back in his seat, appearing very confused. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Cupid's granddaughter."